Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to re-energize and make some connections with other audience members here today. Well, next we have our panel discussion on secure by design, cybersecurity as a foundation for digital transformation. As I mentioned earlier, the global pandemic has highlighted unprecedented challenges for anyone working in public sector cybersecurity, and predicting what's next carries a lot of uncertainty. We've seen the public sector taking steps to digitally transform virtually overnight throughout the pandemic to ensure continuity, even, I'll put my teeth back in, of citizen services. Nevertheless, with a recent survey finding 76.1% marked rise in cybersecurity threats compared to the same time last year, cybersecurity is arguably the most important step in any organization's digital transformation journey, and the sector must continue to evolve as cyber attackers become more sophisticated, driven by weaknesses remote working presents. The lack of integration between legacy IT and modern security solutions proves challenging too, and leaves organizations open to attacks and threats, which cost millions in recovery. Well, this panel discussion will, I hope, uncover how the public sector can ensure it's secure by design, using cybersecurity as a foundation in the digital transformation journey. So to help me dive into these challenges and changes the sector faces, I'm delighted to have with me Councillor Mary Lanigan, leader of Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council, who hopefully will be popping up shortly, Jeff Connell, Head of Information Management and Technology for Norfolk County Council, Paul Ward, Head of ICT and Digital at Coventry City Council, and Andy Fernandez, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Zerto. And remember, this is a perfect opportunity for you to ask any questions you may have of our panelists by using the live Q&A chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. I really like to think of these panel debates as a conversation with you very much part of them. So ask as many of questions as you can, and once we get into the debate, I'll try and bring you into the conversation. So good to see you, everybody. I'm hoping Mary is going to pop up very shortly. She's in our system somewhere, but slightly lost. So I'm sure she'll just appear as if by magic. Andy, can we start off with you perhaps setting the scene for us and explaining why public sector organizations are left open and vulnerable to cyber attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the first part, we have to talk about the motivation behind a lot of these attacks. I like to, based on the research that we like to talk about ransomware in kind of two different sectors. You have your ransomware as a service sector, people explicitly looking for a for-profit, quick, high volume types of attack. And then you have things that are a bit more mischievous and state-backed. So when you think about public sector organizations and you think about how important they are to the community, to governments, to their end users, we see them as a very clear victim, as an easily exploitable victim in the hacker's eyes. So that's kind of why we see not only public sector organizations, but financial institutions, healthcare organizations, anyone that has critical data is a victim or a potential victim and has these threats. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. And we're only seeing an evolution in the sense that the attacks are getting more sophisticated. They're getting more specialized on an industry basis, and that includes public sector as well. And we're also seeing an increase in both the volume and severity of these attacks, even going beyond virtualized environments and moving into SaaS applications and containerized applications as well. So as public sector organizations adopt new technologies, they unlock all the benefits of those technologies, but you also bring in new threats as well.
That was very, very well put. Following on from that, Paul, why do you think that local government is becoming an increasing target of cybercrime?
Well, I think that, I mean, for colleagues that have worked in local government for a few years, they recognise the role that local government plays within communities. But I think that that has been really pushed to the fore during COVID, and the role that local governments have played in terms of cities and regions and towns' responses to COVID, in terms of the coordination response that have been taken and been led by local government. So I think that has caught the attention of attackers, and they recognise, because obviously one of the motives for attackers is to cause the maximum amount of disruption for the least amount of effort. So they recognise that local government organisations do play a very key role in gluing communities together, driving communities forward. So we are seen as a higher attacker. Also, was a high target. Also, there's a recognition that local government organisations now are seen as a entry point to higher, what would be classed as a higher value target. So central government, through the integrations that we've got to DWP as an example, or the NHS as an example. Most local government organisations will have links to the NHS as well. So it's a combination of things, and in reality, it's just hackers have kind of caught on to the fact of what people who've worked in local government for many years have already known, that local government is a really pivotal part of local communities and indeed the kind of national government context.
Jeff, feel free to add to that, but this isn't mainly an IT issue, is it?
Yeah, thanks. I would recognise, as Paul says, that there is a degree that some hackers will think of local government or indeed schools, which have been a high priority target for a lot of hackers in recent times, as kind of the soft underbelly and the route into NHS and central government. Thankfully, that isn't really true. Increasingly, cybersecurity in local government is in good shape, but it is still often a matter of getting the basics right, particularly as a lot of these attacks aren't even targeted. They're just generalized, hit everybody and see who's not properly patched, etc. So we've got to keep getting the basics right. And sorry, what was the other point you were making?
I was just saying, if you wanted to follow on, but this isn't mainly an IT issue, and in terms of solving it, is it?
No, indeed. In fact, I always talk about it as a team sport. The hackers, they share resources, they work together. So we absolutely have to. And whether that's local government with central government, or indeed just within an organisation. Yes, the IT team is important, but so is the business continuity team. So are the incident response people, the strategists, because we're talking today about by design. An awful lot of this is not about patching and retro fixing. It's about creating digital services for the future, which are cloud native, which exploit the opportunities that are out there to get things right in the first place. Because I always say we've got to get it right every single day, all the time. A hacker just needs to get lucky once. And the cost of a breach and the disruption of a breach is so massive compared to the minor disruption, if you like, of continuously patching and keeping up to date and putting good defenses in place.
Andy and Paul, you're both nodding away there. Do you want to chip in on what Jeff said?
Paul, you can go first if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with Jeff in terms of this. This isn't just an IT thing. I love it's a team sport mentality. Absolutely is an awareness amongst users, and I think that something that has really come to the fore again during COVID is that a number of people are using technology more in their personal lives. And you start to see more. You don't have to go very far. And this isn't just because we work in the tech industry, but it's in national press about hacks against various organisations that people use in their personal lives. So I think it's not just an IT thing. I think the IT industry does need to continue to do a very good job at making it more human-centric in terms of some of the terminology we use. It is a deeply technical area when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, but actually focusing on impact, focusing on the simple steps that people can take, because awareness is one of the key tools that we have in our arsenal to defend against cyber attacks.
Andy?
I agree with what Paul and Jeff is saying. When you think about where organizations sit, whether public sector or not, everyone is dealing with a higher growth of data. With that comes more responsibilities to manage, more responsibility to back that data up, to make sure that you have a continuous availability of that data. But the problem is that apart from maybe law enforcement and a few other organizations, cybersecurity is one of the only industries where the scale of innovation is on the side of a criminal. So we're always playing catch up, no matter what. We can't proactively foresee every single vulnerability because people are the largest vulnerability and their behavior. So when we think about, is this the IT manager, is this the CIO, is this the CISO's problem? This is everybody's problem. This is a board discussion now, because the board and the leadership are able to set the tone of, are we properly going to invest in both training our people, but also training our organization and finding the right tools to get that data.
Jeff, were you indicating you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just want to build on that point about, this is a board level issue. In fact, it's a board level risk management issue, first and foremost, more than technical issue. It's about risk appetite. It's about understanding the nature of the data assets that you're protecting, how important they are. And then all the technical stuff about where do you store it, how do you handle it, flows from that. And I think too often it is considered to be a techie issue until it goes wrong. And then it's absolutely everybody's problem.
Let's talk a little bit about when it does go wrong. Just incidentally, by the way, preparing for this conference terrifies me as somebody who, just uses tech generally on a personal level, because I'm aware of how unaware I am of people getting into we're so used, aren't we, to putting our credit cards in, our details, and seeing things, if you've done a little bit of surfing on the internet for something and then you're seeing adverts pop up the next minute. It makes me feel how naive I am in my personal life talking to you guys. But what I'd like to do is, Mary's still not with us. In fact, she is probably just about to join. Mary, that is absolutely perfect timing. Because I was about to ask Jeff to talk us through a little bit about what had happened to you at Redcar in Cleveland, but you're here now, so welcome. And I know you had a cyber attack on your council. Tell us a bit about it and how serious it was.
It was actually catastrophic. I got a phone call one Saturday morning from my managing director to say our systems had gone down. We didn't actually know at that time what had actually happened. It turned out it was a cyber attack. It was from a foreign country that we got. So what happened to our staff is we had nothing. Everything went down. Telephone lines went down when people tried to contact into us. And of course, because we didn't have connections with police, everybody pulled all the systems that we had. So my staff were actually working with pens and papers, and we had to put up other phone lines to get them in there, temporary. We had no way to pay our staff. I had to get another local authority to come in. Central government were quite good. I got GCHQ up as quickly as we could once we found out what was going on there. And it did actually go to Cobra. I got a ransom attack. Yes, it went to Cobra. I got a ransom attack. They sent me a connection to say that they wanted this money and then they would remove the virus out of the system. The problem being about that is, once I'd actually spoken to GCHQ, putting viruses into our system like they had, there was no guarantee that they could remove it once it was in, because it worked like a worm right through the systems. And of course, what we had was, because we've got social services, you can imagine the impact that actually had on us. It was absolutely catastrophic. And
can you describe, Mary, can you describe a bit of that impact? Sorry to interrupt you there, but I'm just wondering if you can give us a flavour of that impact, particularly because obviously you've got social services to think about.
Well, we lost all of the IT systems, so we had no access to any of the computers. Telephone, printers, Wi-Fi, everything actually went down. And the website that we had was totally destroyed. So it was mobile phones, of course, we had to rehost them up to try and get in. We were trying to keep in touch with public as much as we could. A lot of vulnerable people sat within Redcar Cleveland Council where we were, and we were trying to connect with them. So you can imagine how absolutely difficult that was in order to do that. The staff came in, we were working 24/7. My IT staff were working alongside GCHQ, who actually came up to help. And it turned out that my staff were actually sleeping in the offices in order to try to unravel what we had, to try to get those systems back up. We managed to recover some, but most of our systems had to be all rebuilt in order to do that. We prioritised as much of the vulnerable as we could within Redcar Cleveland, but you can imagine a lot of elderly people that we had to send people out in order to say it's okay, we're getting everything up and as quickly as we can. But it took weeks and it cost a great deal of money in order to do that, to rebuild. We were in constant contact with central government. We were speaking to the ministers every day as to what was going on. And the first question, what they said to me was, "Are you going to pay this ransom attack, Mary?" And I said, "I absolutely am not." Because the thing being about that is, had we done that, I didn't know what impact that was going to have on the rest of the local authorities that we had. We understand that this virus had been put into our systems weeks before. And so for some reason, someone had clicked on that, not realizing what was in there. And of course, it started off that chain of events, which was absolutely appalling. I did speak to the LGA, and I've spoken to the leaders of most of the authorities within the country to explain to them what had happened to us, because we'd already got a clean bill of health from the LGA. We were in the top 20%, Redcar Cleveland, for safety, but you learn at your costs that there's actually no such thing as safety in there, and they can get into the systems. So what we've done now is I've brought a company in, and what they're doing is they're targeting us, because our systems we feel are 90% safe. However, we've got them coming in and they are putting viruses in, not that it's going to see if we can detect, to see exactly how that, if we can pick those up. But the systems at Redcar Cleveland were all together. And what we've done now is we've separated all those so that if we get another cyber attack, it's only going to hit a certain amount of us that we can recover. We've got backup services now that we can recover quite quickly on there to bring them back into line. But it's critical that the other local authorities, because there's a lot of them, weren't even up to the levels that we were. So we've talked them through that, and we're sharing that across the country.
Gosh, Mary, what an extraordinary story. And your timing to pop up on the conference was absolutely perfect. I feel that we've sort of been lucky to hear that story, you know, in your own words. So let's get a bit of reaction to it. Andy, first of all, your thoughts to what Mary's explained. And also, can you tell us a bit more about how ransomware attacks have evolved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so if you think about ransomware becoming what I would call mainstream, maybe 5-6 years ago, you guys can correct me on that. But ultimately what we're seeing is the attacks are getting much, much more sophisticated. They're increasing in volume. We're even seeing perpetrators use the backup services themselves to encrypt or to find the data that they actually want to exploit. But it goes beyond just encrypting the data and waiting for money to come back. It also goes into, let's just almost act as a parasite and use this company's organization, this IT organization, to pump cryptocurrency for us, right? That's what they call a cryptojacking scheme. You have other areas, especially when we talk about public sector, when we talk about healthcare and finance, which is data leakage, where sometimes the ransomware attack is a distraction from the fact that they just want to be able to leak your data, whether that's for financial reasons or it is for political reasons. So what Mary described is a very, very common example of how, one, all it takes is one person to be able to initiate the sequence of events, but two, it's how much time, resources, and labor goes into recovering these systems, getting things back up and running. And what we see that organizations are doing really well is they are bringing third party in. They are bringing third party people to not only educate the organization, but also test the resilience of the IT systems as well. So that falls in line exactly what we're seeing. And it's good to see that so many steps are taken afterwards.
Jeff, I noticed that you were absolutely shaking your head when and pleased to hear that Mary did not pay the ransom.
Yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of these people, this is a business, isn't it? And if they think that they will get a ransomware payout, then we'll be targeted even more. And I just want to say here, if there's any potential hackers listening, we do not pay. We do not pay out. But as Mary's conveyed very clearly, the cost and the disruption impact of a successful attack are very significant. And I think we all have to take learning from that, particularly as Cleveland Redcar was not a bad council in terms of its cybersecurity. And indeed, when I look at Hackney and some others that have been hit, they weren't bad either. They just had a bad day, or there was a vulnerability at a point in time that got exploited. And so the starting point was getting offline backups. That's what the whole local government's been doing in recent times to make sure that you can at least recover. But then ransomware's pivoted. And so it's not just about pay us some money and we'll give you the keys back to unencrypt your data. It's now about, actually, we've exfiltrated some of your data. We will publish that on the dark web if you don't pay us. So that's an additional reason why we have to be secure, because we have to protect the data of particularly the vulnerable people whose information that we store to look after them. So I think certainly the business continuity angle as well came through from what Mary was saying. We've got to make sure that we are sadly pretty much expecting a breach of some sort at some time, and we've tested and we're ready to respond. But yeah, I was pleased to hear that the view was very much that we would not pay. Same with the schools as well.
Paul, it sounded like Mary had a lot of support. She's got a little phone call coming in there. What was it about her story that resonated with you, and and particularly on perhaps the recovery side?
Well, I don't know about Jeff, but Councillor Lanigan's story certainly sent chills down my spine in terms of if something would happen in Norfolk or Coventry, in terms of the role, the teams that Jeff and I look after in our respective roles. You immediately go there in your head in terms of, okay, how would we deal with that? How would we handle that? And it is really, really interesting. And I think that whilst there's about 380 local government organisations in the country, and Redcar and Cleveland for Councillor Lanigan was probably one of the first high-profile councils that were hit with a ransomware attack of this scale. The next one being Hackney. Both of those councils, and Jeff kind of alluded to this, both of those are councils in terms of, in our respective roles, you look at and think, okay, well, actually, Redcar and Cleveland, they're doing well, from a technology point of view. They have done well from a technology point of view. Hackney, absolutely. They're seen as a leading light in London in terms of some of the digital innovation that they are doing. And it does make you take a step back and think, well, actually, if Redcar and Cleveland can be attacked, if Hackney can be attacked, then, as I think Jeff's already alluded to, no one is immune from this, and almost to a certain extent, whatever protections you put in place, there's always that risk there. In terms of a recovery point of view, and this again goes to perhaps a further answer to the original question you asked me, Mary, was that local government organisations run so many services. So Coventry, as an example, runs about 700, 800 services. And whereas private company might have, say, 3 or 4 product lines, and kind of the attack points are there, you've got 700 different services which run as 700 different enterprises almost within the organisation. So recovery across those, the recovery in social care will be completely different to the recovery that was required in domestic waste, recovery that's required in HR, because it's almost 700 different plans that are needed to do that. So, hats off to Redcar and Cleveland in terms of the role that they've played in this, and because it has raised awareness, and unfortunately, very, very painful for Redcar and Cleveland, obviously, but it has raised awareness within local government industry, and the work of the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ, which Councillor Lanigan referenced there, is good. It's phenomenal, and we continue on that charge.
Mary, I'm just wondering, before we sort of broaden out onto other things, what the financial impact on the council was, and also what effect did the attack have on your staff?
The staff were amazing, got to say that. It was very stressful for them. Financially wise, I had a bit of a chew with central government over this. This was a criminal act on the local authority. It actually came in, we estimated over £10 million initially when that was in. we worked extremely hard with GCHQ to get that built up. I asked central government for funding for this going forward, and I can absolutely tell you that it took me 9 months talking to civil servants and central government in order to try to get some financial help from this, because as you can imagine, it was absolutely disruptive and rebuilding all the systems. I eventually did get some money from them, and it was just sat under £4 million. I understand that some of the local authorities that were hit, Copeland in particular, didn't get any money at all for that going forward. But I persisted. It still cost us a great deal of money, but what I've done now is all the officers at Redcross Cleveland have had extensive training. All the members at Redcross Cleveland have had extensive training, and this is ongoing. It's something that we monitor on a real regular basis going forward, in the hope this isn't going to happen to us again. But you can never say never with these things. So everybody is on high alert as to what's going on up there at the moment. And why they attacked Redcross Cleveland, I wasn't sure. The first theory that we got is because they were hitting the United States. We actually thought that it was maybe meant for Cleveland, Ohio, and they hit us. So I'm sorry about that. So that was what we actually thought about that. But there is still a criminal case ongoing. We do know that it came from a foreign government, not the government, but a foreign country, where this actually hit us from. So that's still ongoing. But GCHQ, I have to say, were absolutely amazing. Central governments were, in order to lead us, but out of all this, I have to praise our staff. They were working with pens and pieces of paper, trying to contact us and other people and our vulnerable. And so it was difficult for our local police services and everyone else that connects into the council, because as soon as this hit, of course, they pulled the plug. So we couldn't get in touch with anyone until we got our new phones put in where we could contact them. So it was very difficult.
Gosh, well done, Mary, because I'm sure it was also probably a steep learning curve as well. If it's the first time it's happened like this, so it sounds like you handled it brilliantly. Andy, how should organizations build a data protection and cyber resilience practice to prepare for attacks like the ransomware attack that Mary's council experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff and Paul, you guys chime in whenever you want, because I know you're driving a lot of this now. What we've seen, right, in the history of what I would call cybersecurity, before, you had your data center, you had a castle, and you built your defenses and a moat and everything you could around that castle. Your budget, everything was focused on protection and preventative technology. But as we understand, people are accessing data from all types of locations, different platforms. It's not on premises anymore. You have cloud platforms as well. You have additional workloads. People don't realize that in their phone, they have thousands of important units of information in SaaS applications as well. And so what this means is, now that we know that this is an economy of scale for criminals, that it's not about reducing budget on prevention, but it's also adding budget to focus on a recovery safety net. Because the cliche phrase now is, it's not a matter of if, but when a ransomware attack hits, and you have to be ready from a data protection perspective. The problem is that data protection has been extremely reactive, and we haven't seen a lot of changes. Think of the traditional rule behind backups is 3-2-1 rule, right? You have 3 copies of your data, 2 media types, 1 off-site. But the problem is that the 3-2-1 rule doesn't accommodate too well to new workloads. In nowhere does it account for how quickly can I get this data back, which is extremely important for some of the services within public sector as well. And so what we see is, as an organization, you want to not just have one point of failure, one backup solution. You want to have multiple copies of that data. You want to include disaster recovery solutions, because Ransomware is not just, oh, I've deleted a file. Can you get that back on the repository for me? It is a disaster scenario. So you need to be able to have multiple tiers of recovery. But here's the funniest part. You can have the best solution in the world, but if you're not testing it, it doesn't matter. You don't know if it's going to work. So being able to test and test frequently, but not just, oh, I've performed a backup restore, this works. It's, as an organization, if a ransomware attack were to hit, what are all the steps that we have to take in order to isolate the data, identify the moment of encryption? How do you test that before you get that back up and running on production are extremely important, right? So how you configure, how you build your plans around data protection are just as important as the solutions themselves. You can give the keys to a Ferrari to a child, they don't know how to drive it. So in order, you need the training and the expertise to be able to effectively use it. Otherwise, you're spending money on a solution that you're not using up to 100%.
How, Paul, though, do you balance the need to be flexible and enabling from a technology viewpoint with security considerations? Can these work sort of hand in hand and be compatible, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very, very tricky balance. I mean, if we come at it more from a data protection point of view than a cyber security point of view, for a moment, if you think about your personal lives in terms of whether you use Alexa or Google Home or Siri, in terms of the trade-off that you make personally between convenience and privacy, is quite an interesting one in terms of what you sign away when you tick the box to say you agree to the terms and conditions. Then that's not to say that you shouldn't be using those things. It's just that I think people need to be aware of the trade-off between privacy and convenience in personal lives. In terms of what that means for the technology industry within enterprises and indeed the public sector, I think that again, during the pandemic, the use of technology within the public sector and across every sector has been supercharged, into the stratosphere in terms of the reliance upon technology. I think we just need to reset the narrative around how technology is seen and used within local government, and in particular for this conversation, so that we can build the awareness program around cybersecurity, so that everyone kind of knows how they can build their services and adapt their services to be really digitally fit for now and for the future. But also being aware of the cyber threats that are inherent, and as we've talked about on this session quite a few times, we can't get away from them. I don't think it's necessarily a binary. You can't be flexible if without being insecure. It's the flexibility, is some, and the technology industry does have some way to go here in terms of making sure that the cost of solutions to enable us to remain secure whilst being flexible are achievable for certainly the public sector budget framework. I don't think it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one, Helen, to kind of say, but I think that absolutely the narrative around the importance of cybersecurity needs to be front and centre within local government organisations.
Jeff, I know you'll have thoughts to add, but also, as well as your thoughts to what's already been said, I'm just wondering where our suppliers fit in and whether they can help.
Yeah, good points. So just reflecting on the previous comments, business continuity plans being in place, absolutely essential. Testing those plans, equally essential. We did a recent online thing where we just told all our senior managers, switch the Wi-Fi off on your laptop and deal with this cyber incident simulated that we've sent you in your email. And so they had to use personal phones, bring your own device, WhatsApp, all those kind of things, make sure they could access their plans. So certainly that's really important to me. Another part of it is also reflecting that it's not one size fits all. Why would you put the same defenses on looking after data which is FOIable? Anybody can ask you for it and you'll just give it to them. Don't treat that the same way you treat your social care information. Put them in different places that reflects their value to you as an organization. So I think that's important. Also, there's a concept called zero trust, or SASE, which is about protecting the applications, constantly checking who's able to access them. every time you go to it. So it's not just about protecting your overall network, it's protecting specific data sets and specific application systems. That's direction of travel for the industry. I think we're all on that journey at embracing the security opportunities that are in cloud, because you can configure cloud badly, but if you configure it well, it definitely gives you a step up in terms of cybersecurity capabilities. And the last thing I would just flag up is we are largely 9 to 5 operations. I mean, actually, it might be 8 till 6 or whatever, but by and large, the IT staff are not 24/7. And so I think one of the things we're looking at the moment is regional SOCs, so security operational centers, so that we can pool our capacity and buy in external support to protect us out of hours. Because you will have noticed most hacks happen on a Friday night, so that the bad people get the whole weekend to play with things before you got it quite often.
Mary, as we come to the end of 2021, which has been quite a year for you and the council, how robust are you feeling for 2022? Do you feel you've got the right systems and processes in place to protect you into the new year?
Yes, I do, and I do feel more confident. And Jess, absolutely right, because for social services, that is actually wrapped around security as tight as we can. We've got certain services within Redcross Cleveland that Jess absolutely right, that we don't need that. That's out in the public domain. But we are testing on a regular basis now. We're doing everything we can to make sure, and that's exactly what we're doing. But the rest of the public sector and the other councils within the UK need to learn from Redcross Cleveland, because this was catastrophic. And then, of course, we got COVID on top of that, and I was the new leader in there. So you can imagine that within months of me taking over, we got this. I don't think we can ever be 100% confident. You can't with these things, but we are doing every single thing we can and as robust as we can to make sure that we can pick these things up. And because we are now in silos, if you like, with certain aspects of the council, then if they hit us again, they're only going to hit one sector. But we've got several backups now with it. And we learnt with that from not just the LGA, but GCHQ, in order to make sure that we were as secure as we possibly could be. But you never say never, do you?
You never say never, and I'm guessing that Andy would probably say we can never be 100% safe. And we have come to the end, and I just want to say a special thanks to Mary for actually sort of providing us with a bit of a backbone for that debate. There are still lots more questions I'd have liked to have asked, so I'm hoping that you'll all join us on another one of these virtual events. But what a great and engaging conversation. So a massive thank you to all our brilliant panelists there on panel 1, to Mary, to Jeff, to Paul, and to Andy. And thank you to our audience for listening, and I hope there have been some interesting learnings for you there.